Welcome to English Composition 104, otherwise known as Comp 2, from Cooper Smith Career Consulting, writing a comparison and contrast paper. Before we begin, I would like to, my name is Dr. Sari Rosenberg, by the way. Before we begin again, I would like you to listen to the 11.5-minute a story analysis video that I did prior to this, is to give you some background on the stories themselves. In this assignment, which is assignment 1, you're being asked to write a 500-word essay comparing and contrasting each of the main characters' initiation into adulthood. I'll go over all of that with you. Include specific references from the story you discussed to support your thesis. There will be a sample student paper discussing these stories, which is actually only barn burning, with another story called Eveline, and I'm going to go over that with you as well in the A&P to show you how do you write this type of paper. You can refer to outside critics to support your discussion, which is what I've showed you in the first story analysis video, which has gone over that before. Your required reading is Barn Burning by William Faulkner and The Lie by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. What I'd like you to do now is just listen for a moment, because I'm going to give you a very quick synopsis of Barn Burning and The Lie. Let's begin with what barn burning is. Barn Burning is a short story about a little boy. It was written in 1939 in the South, about a little 10-year-old boy whose father is essentially nuts, for lack of a better word. He goes around, they move from farm to farmland, and he goes, and every time he gets into a fight with someone, he goes to the landowner, he starts burning down their barn, and each town throws them out, which is why they have to move along from place to place, really not setting up roots. And you can, as you read this story, you can see that he's an abusive man to his son, who's named Sardi in all of this. And Sardi has to go along with it because his father is pressuring him to follow the creed of the family, which is to kind of stay quiet. Because they go in front of these little courts that are done within each of the towns, and the man is always found guilty, and he always has to pay a fine, and that's why he moves on from place to place. And this little 10-year-old boy has to keep up the lie of his father and say, my father didn't do it, he didn't do anything. Well, eventually the little boy, they move to a town, and he likes the landowner a lot. And he sees as he's growing up that his father is really an obnoxious sort of man, and he disagrees with him. And his initiation into adulthood is when he finally gets to the point where he knows his father's going to go and burn down this man's barn, where he goes and he warns the man that his father is about to burn down the barn, and the guy comes out with a shotgun and kills his father. And then the boy just walks off into the distance, and he says, I'm done with these people. And he goes off to create a life of his own, and he becomes an adult at 10 years old. We compare that with the story of The Lie by Kurt Vonnegut, which is a story about he's about 13 years old. He finishes the 8th grade, and now it's time to go on to high school. Very, very wealthy, old money family from New York, and he's going to go to this privileged school out in, I guess it's Connecticut or Massachusetts, and they're driving up on the road to get there. And everyone in Eli's family has always gone to this particular school. Generationally, stories was written in the 1960s, early 1960s, and so that you have this generational old family money, and this poor kid is just living in dread because he knows that he's been rejected. And when he gets the rejection letter, it's a very, very high-powered school that is for the very privileged, very elite. Although they do take in scholarship students because they're liberal. They're not the South. They're in the North, and they're a liberal institution. But you really do, at this point, have to earn your way into the school. Back when the father, who's now a very, very wealthy doctor, as well as a wealthy man because he inherited all this family money, when he had to go to the school, you were just considered, the name of the school is White Hill, you were just considered a White Hill student if you were a White Hill student, if you fit the creed of being a model and just the model student, then you were taken in. But now, as the school became bigger and bigger, you really did have to earn your way academically because it's an academic institution. And this boy is not an academic boy at all. And he's extremely fearful to tell his father that he just didn't get in because he's just not an academic. So he takes the letter and he gets rid of it before his family finds out. And they assume, of course, since they are probably the largest donors generationally to the school and built the buildings and continue to build the buildings, that their son is going to, they never even ask if he's been accepted to the school, because the assumption is, of course, because he's a Remensal. At the same time, the father is very hard on his son, and there's a lot of family expectation from this father that the son is going to reach a level of keeping the family code, which is never to ask for favors, because in their family, when you're that wealthy, you never have to ask for favors, and certainly the father, the doctor, never had to ask it. So he's always on this rampage, and this he's tyrannical, and he's verbally abusive as you read the story to his family. He's not a very nice character at all in the way he treats both his wife and his son, that they don't embarrass him and they don't ask for any favors. So Eli is now living with this lie, and it's called the lie for that reason, that he's living with the secret as they take their journey. Well, of course, when they get there, everybody finds out that the boy hasn't been accepted, and then he runs away and he goes through this whole dramatic climatic scene. But the father goes, and after he finds out the son has not been accepted, he goes and he asks for a favor, which goes against the family motto of never asking for favors. Well, the initiation into adulthood by the son is for a little boy, because you see him as being this timid character throughout the story. He's very quiet. He's very disturbed. He's really in a bind. He just does not know how to deal with his father. And at the end of the story, what you'll notice is that he just lets out on his father, because his father is a hypocrite, and he faces him and he confronts him, and he just yells at him and he rants at him, and he becomes a man. He goes from being this little boy, and his initiation into adulthood is watching his father be a hypocrite and breaking the family code, and then he just lets loose on him. And although it may seem disrespectful, but his initiation into adulthood is that he's not going to take the abuse anymore from his father. And when you compare it to Sardi in Barn Burning, is another boy who says, I'm just not going to take the abuse anymore. And that, in a nutshell, are the two stories that we're going to be dealing with. So let's look at the elements of the assigned paper. You're going to first have a theme, your introduction, which is going to start the way, and now we do have another video that I would like you to see on how do you write a 5-paragraph essay, which explains the whole concept of how do you write an introduction and the theme. And remember that we're dealing here now with English Comp 102, so that there's an assumption that you've already learned this before in English Comp 101. That this is just a review for you. So again, you're going to have your introduction and your thesis statement, and in this point it's going to be the initiation into adulthood, which will be the theme of your paper. Your analysis of the subject will be paragraph number 2, which in this case, as an example, you will write just on Sardi in Barn Burning and give us information about him. And then you'll have your next paragraph would be the analysis of Eli and the lion. You're going to talk about him. And then in the next paragraph, you're going to do, in your third body paragraph, you're going to do a comparison between the two boys and how were they different. And in a certain way, and I don't want you to be afraid, you're going to say, well, am I just repeating what I already put down in the first paragraph and in the second paragraph? A little bit, that is correct, but you're going to be doing it in a way, hopefully bringing in something new, more to the effect that it's going to tie the two boys together in some way. That's what I would like, whether either you're saying how they are alike or how they're different. But that's what I would like you to do in some way, is just to bring it together. If you're adding in more information or not, don't be too repetitive, but you need to do that as part of the compare and contrast. And then as a conclusion, which just sums up, the whole paper in itself. Again, refer back to our video on how do you write a 5-paragraph essay, because that's going to be the most helpful. What I'd like you to see now is from our textbook that some of you may have and some of you may not. Again, the textbook is easily bought on Amazon, and I have used copies that I bought for a penny and then $3.99 shipping and handling. But it's called Literature, Reading, Reacting, and Writing. And in it, I took this out from you so you could either follow along in the textbook or you could follow along here. And the textbook gives an example of how to do this particular assignment. So here we have, but it's different stories. It's not The Lie, it's Eveline and the A&P. But I'd like you to just read it so that you can see. In our first scenario here, we have the introduction, and I'm just going to show you here. I'm going to let you read it yourself because I think it's going to help. I'm just going to give you some time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down, and then what I'd like you to do is just pause so that you could read it fully. Okay, so that now we're up to here. I'm showing you the discussion of the second story, and we have the discussion of the third story, and then we have the comparative analysis of the 3 stories, and then followed by the conclusion. And what this is showing you as you read it and pause, and here's a second sample. The second sample, according to the textbook, and I agree, is not as well written as the first one. But again, we have the introduction, the discussion of the first story, discussion of the second story, and what you're going to do is essentially use barn burning and The Lie in which to complete this assignment. Please note that in the second essay there is not a comparison between both. Let's move it on up and see what we have here. The discussion of the third story of barn burning is a separate entity. Moving back up, the discussion of the second story, the A&P, is a separate entity, and the discussion of the first story, Eveline, is a second entity. What they don't have in the second essay, which is what makes it inferior to the first essay, is one paragraph which binds the stories together as one and compares all the characters, and that's what I would like to see in your assignment. I'd like to go over the short stories for students with you, and first we're going to do it on barn burning, so you can follow along with me. And we're just going to keep, scroll down, and this is what you would do at home when you were doing this yourself. And they give you a lot of information at the beginning, especially acknowledgments. Okay, so barn burning. You would read you could just look over very quickly the background of the story, but it's the author biography. But what you really want to be focusing in now is the plot summary. So, in the plot summary, what it tells you is exactly what happened. Let's go over the first line. The opening scene of Barn Burning finds the story's protagonist, a 10-year-old named Colonel Sartoris or Sardi, waiting with his father. Abner Snopes is a southern small-town general store being used as a courtroom. The time is 10 or 15 years after the Civil War. What we know in these few sentences, we know who our main character is. We know that it's going to be Sardi. We know that he's 10 years old. We know that he's with his father. And we know the setting of the story and the time period, which is very, very important. Okay. We also know that Ab Snopes has been called into court on a charge of arson by his landlord employer. Ab is a sharecropper, one who rents farmland by promising to remit part of his harvest to the property owner. Sardi is acutely aware of the physical aspects of the place. Okay, so we know again also that, and that's going to be the repeated pattern throughout the story, is that Ab Snopes keeps getting called in to these little courts, if you may, because he keeps burning down barns. And we know from what I've told you before that that's the world that Sardi's living in. Then you can read this to yourself, and I think that this is going to help you write your essay. And then where is it through all of this that he's going to have? Here we go. Let's go to this paragraph because this one is interesting. Sardi has known for a very long time that his father, something wrong in that his father is a barn burner. Let's just read this section here. The Snopes camp that night. Ab builds a fire which Sardi finds curiously meager given that it burns on rails plundered from a nearby fence and might be as big as the plunderer wanted to make it. Abruptly, Ab accuses Sardi of having been on the verge of telling the truth to the judge, or as Ab sees it, of betraying him, the father. Although he doesn't answer, Sardi senses this to be true, and in any case, Ab is convinced that it is true and slaps Sardi across the face. Sardi, in this paragraph, is beginning to notice the truth about his life and about his father. He notices that his father, who is a professional barn burner and steals wood, creates a meager fire just for the family, when he could actually go, if you're stealing the wood anyway, at least make a nice fire for your family to keep them warm. If your depends on what your motivation is. But he doesn't use fire, he doesn't use the wood in a positive way for his family. It's only in a very destructive way. The other thing is that Sardi notices is that, yeah, he really might have told the truth to the judge. His father realizes that he might have told the truth, and what Sardi does is think about telling the judge, and this is at this point he's really becoming a man because he's beginning to understand the truth about who his father is. And his father slaps him across the face. The next thing that the father does that Sardi finds objectionable is that he goes there. They finally move into another neighborhood. They move to another farm, and the father goes, and he steps in horse manure, and he walks into their house, and he gets it all over their carpet. This is going to start the accusations by the landowner, who wants to sue him for the value of the carpet to have it cleaned, that he's ruined. Let's go over here for a moment, and we'll see that moving down, Sardi rebels at this plan and determines to thwart his father. Sardi realizes that his father's intention is to burn down this man's barn, and he matures into adulthood, and he stands up to him, and he goes to the landowner and he says, stop my father. His father is then shot dead, and it says over here at the last paragraph, he feels a strange peace which he is too young to understand. He's still 10 years old. His maturation into adulthood comes at the price of losing his child, which he obviously never really had a childhood. His father's now dead, and he's walking away, and he does not look back. He's moving on forward, and Sardi, now at 10 years old, becomes an adult, having realized the truth about his father. Just want to mention that if you scroll down after the plot summary, I want you to look at the characters. The characters are listed in Short Stories for Students, where you have a synopsis of who the character is. So if you could just scroll down to Sardi for a moment, you'll see that there's a full description of who he is, and this you can all read on your own. And I just want to give that over there. And again for Abner Snopes, and he continues, and over there you'll be looking at Abner, and you'll be looking at Sardi. Just read up on them. You don't necessarily need them for their that much for the essay, but it's good to have a background of who they are. And I just think that that's important, because you're looking at all these pages that are coming through from Short Stories and Students and saying, okay, well, so much information, I feel overwhelmed. Don't feel overwhelmed. Take out from it what you need, and that's all the information that you need. We're now going to move on and analyze Eli Remensel from The Lie by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. The Lie, I'm just going to review with you what we did in the previous video, but I'd like you to this is really short, and there isn't that much that's written on The Lie. It's a short story that critics were not, here I'm just going to show you this, the critics were not impressed with the collection, and even the author Kurt Vonnegut remarked that the stories were merely samples of work I sold in order to finance the writing of novels. So he wasn't even impressed with that work itself. Although the story The Lie is used in academia, I could see why, because there really is. It's a lot better than he thought. So it's about the Remensel family, and you could just look this over and read this yourself. And about the son's lie, as I told you before when I gave you a synopsis of the story, Eli's this 13-year-old boy who is now in trouble because he had lied about getting accepted into his father's prestigious school. And what I want to focus in now on is the relationship between the father and son, and how Eli moves into manhood, into adulthood, from being this little child. Let's move down, and I want you to just to stop for a moment, because I want to make sure that you have this information and that you can read this as well. Let's move down and go to this. Here we go. Here's our plot summary. When the story opens, we're quickly engaged in the world of the wealthy and powerful. Eli Remensel, a 14-year-old, is traveling with his parents and the driver of their Rolls Royce to Whitehall. What I'd like you to see is that there is a large difference from the very beginning between who is, now that you've done barn burning, in the life of these two gentlemen, these two young boys. One is going to be very poor and one is going to be very wealthy, yet both have issues with their fathers. The Remensels have in fact been attending this boarding school for generations, and the result have made many financial contributions. It's funny that this article came from Yale University, and there's a lot of mistakes in it, and I'm going to point them out to you. It's White. They have it here as Whitehall. It's actually White Hill in the story. They have it as Remensel. It's actually Remensel. And I took this information, I cut and pasted this information straight from Yale University, so I think it's really funny that it's not just things that are not even correct. Again, just looking at the plot summary, I want you to notice that at the end, and you can read this yourself, the importance of Dr. Remensel trying to pressure and use power tactics, as it's called here in the summary, towards the members of the board to allow Eli to go into the school, and Eli is very upset that he's broken his own rule. Let's go to the criticism of the story Here we go. Vonnegut chooses the omniscient point of view in the telling of the story. It affords the reader an honest appraisal of all characters, though characters may try to hide from themselves. That's just looking at who they are. They cannot hide from the reader. We get to know Dr. Remenzel, and although he considers himself to be a very fair, liberal man, he's actually a very hard man who is actually a spoiled child. He's an adult, but when you read the story, you're thinking to yourself, he's nothing more than a spoiled adult who's never been said no to in his whole life. I'd like you just to read this whole section here. This is an important part of the criticism over here. Though we feel empathy for the shame Eli feels with his father, this rejection of him, we are mostly keenly aware of a mask of power and the impotent soul who desperately hides behind it. So that really describes who Dr. Remenzel is. He is a bully, and he is a bit of an abuser to his family, and I'm going to go back in and show you about just what were the details that pushed Eli to stand up to his father and say, enough is enough. So let's go into the story now that we have this. So now we're going to be talking about The Lie by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. At the beginning of The Lie, you have a family that's traveling up, as we said before, to go up to Massachusetts, to where the boy is supposedly going to school. The issue, and what we're going to be looking at and focusing in on, is what our assignment is, which is to talk about the maturation process of Eli and how he evolves and initiates from being that of a little boy at 13 years old into becoming a man and standing up to his father. So we're going to be looking at the conflicts between himself and his father, and what the expectation of who Eli was supposed to be and who he actually was. The characterization, and it's not that long of a story for you just to read over quickly yourself, since there really isn't a clear synopsis of the story, just to be familiar with it. Eli's characterized as this weak child who doesn't know how to tell his parents, and he slumps down in the car, and he sits there quietly, and the chauffeur thinks that there's something wrong with him, that he's sick. And that's who Eli is. He knows he's not a great student. He doesn't know how to let anybody else know because he's under so much pressure from his father. But he basically knows who he is. He just doesn't know what to do with all of that. And that is very childlike. But what's interesting to note is where the conflict comes in with his father, is that while the chauffeur asks and wants to find out and says automatically, is there something wrong with his behavior? Because supposedly this should have been a very happy day. And Eli is acting very strange. He's not acting like a normal 13-year-old boy who's now going off to this great family legacy school. He should be happy by the prospect of going there and being at this great institution. And instead, he's very quiet, he's very subdued, and nobody cares. There's the conflict. The fact that the father doesn't even when somebody says, oh, Eli, are you feeling well? He doesn't, yeah, whatever. He doesn't even take the time to really examine and look at his own child. Eli is to Dr. Remenzel, there's an expression called the trophy wife. He is the trophy child. It's more of him being a Remenzel, his child being the Remenzel and carrying on the family legacy, than looking at Eli himself and saying, who are you, my son? And that's where the conflict comes in between the father and the son in this story. I'd like to just scroll down at one of some important points that I want you to notice. If you go down, this is one. Right here, let me tell you, in no uncertain terms, said Dr. Remenzel, that you are not to ask for anything special for Eli, not anything. This comes about when Sylvia, the wife, who was, born into poverty and somehow married well, how Sylvia is just curious about whether or not there could be special treatment of Eli. And the father, Dr. Menzel, is adamant. The motto, the creed, the foundation of being a Menzel is you do not ask for any special favors. It is, by definition, who they are. You stand on your own 2 feet and you get what you deserve. You are a Menzel, but you never use that as a position of power. Moving along, we find later on in the story that Dr. Menzel meets up with an old friend while they're driving along, and their cars pull side by side. And this is a scholarship student. He was a scholarship student back then when Dr. Menzel had gone to White Hill, and now his son is going to be attending White Hill as a scholarship student. And they decided to meet up and have lunch together. But both fathers were proudly beaming, knowing that their sons were going to be accepted into White Hill, this very, very famous institution. And then after that, the windows go up and they go back into they continue driving. Dr. Menzel still sees that Eli is slumped down, and then he very sharply says, and let's look at those words. He goes, "Eli," he said sharply, "sit up straight." He turned his attention to Sylvia. He yells at his child to sit up. This has been going on their entire trip, and he doesn't stop to find out what is really wrong. When a child is so frightened of his parent that he feels that he can't tell them the truth, then there's obviously something wrong in their relationship. And as we scroll on down further, we're going to find that later on he says that as well to him. "Eli," said the doctor, "sit up. What's the matter with you?" So he finally asks, what's the problem? Eli sat up again, but began to slump almost immediately like a snowman in the sun. Eli had good reason for slumping, for actually hoping to die or disappear. The pressure on Eli to have, and using the words to die or disappear, just because he didn't get into a school, shows how unhealthy their relationship was, and shows how much pressure the father put on the son, and that in itself is abusive. He had a very, very difficult childhood, this boy, and how he becomes a man given all of this actually happens rather quickly. We're going to see as the story moves along that Eli, who's this weak, beaten down puppy dog who doesn't have the courage to tell his father, gets the courage very quickly towards the end. And I just want to follow you through now, through the road of how does all of that come about, where Eli does stand up to his father and purge all the feelings that he's harbored inside himself. If you move down, you'll see the doctor ordered a drink, then turned to his son and said, "Your mother has the idea that you're entitled to special privileges around here. I hope you don't have that idea too." "No, sir," said Eli. "It would be a source of greatest embarrassment to me," said Dr. Menzel with considerable grandeur, "if I were ever to hear that you had used the name Menzel as though you thought Menzels were something special." This is also a very, very important 2 paragraphs within the story, because we're going to see that the doctor causes his own embarrassment. But the creed, again, and the motto of the family, and the indoctrination, and the fear that has been put into this child from birth was, you do not ask for special privileges, and you are a Menzel, and most of all, you never ever embarrass the doctor by doing something which goes against the family motto of asking for a favor. So as the story progresses, what you're going to be reading is that they find out that Eli was actually not admitted because they went up there to admit him, And of course they're going to find out the truth. And Eli runs out of the dining room, and he just runs out because he doesn't know what to do with himself. He could only carry his lies so far. The mother, when she finds out what has happened, and don't forget she comes from a poor background and is not a born Remensel, she goes and runs after her child. Dr. Remensel, instead of running after his child to see, oh my gosh, my son must be so embarrassed, in so much pain, let me take care of him, he says, okay, we'll worry about Eli later. And it becomes about the trophy. It doesn't become about Eli. And his only interest is to get his boy admitted into the school. So he stands there and he tries to ask for favors, which goes against the family motto of asking for favors, to try to get the boy, and he speaks to the people on the board. The mother goes out and she talks to Eli, and she says to him, she goes, and she admits, she goes, this was our mistake, and she takes full responsibility for what happened. The father comes out, and she knows what the father is up to, and she herself doesn't know what to do, because she doesn't want Eli to find out, because that he went against the family creed, the father. But nevertheless, the father comes out, and it comes out that nobody on the board would listen to him or give him any special treatment or any special favors, but that he had asked. When Eli finds out about it, he absolutely laces it into his father, and you're going to see what happens here. He says, the shame was instant. You what, he said, and there was no childishness in the way he said it. Next came anger. You shouldn't have done that, he said to his father. Dr. Remensel nodded. So I've already been told. That isn't done, said Eli. How awful. You shouldn't have. He yells at his father with the kind of anger and brutality from which he was raised. Eli might not have been the brightest student in the world, but he knew that he was a Remensel, and he followed the rules of the family, and he wasn't going to break them. He didn't. The thing about Eli in this whole story is that Eli could have gone to his parents to begin with and said, ask for special favors, but he knew that he didn't even want that to happen, not only because he wasn't an academic, but because he really believed that even though he wasn't an academic, that being a Remensel and following the rules of the family was something that he could carry out, and he did. He followed the rules of the family. And Dr. Remensel broke those rules. And in the eyes of his son, Dr. Remensel was nothing more than a hypocrite. And Eli goes from being a child into being an adult. And he gets back at his father. Now, the moral aspect of whether or not he handled it properly is not the issue. The issue is that this is what Eli did to his father, and in so he became a man and he matured. He was never going to be the little child slumped down in the front seat of the car again. Eli Remensel was going to be a man who, whether he went to White Hill or didn't go to White Hill, he was on the road to acceptance of who he is. And one thing was for sure, Eli Remensel knew at the end of the day that he truly was Remensel, more so than his father. And he had that over him because he was a person who didn't ask for special favors, although his father did. What I'd like you to notice from here on is that what I'm going to be showing you is how to write a compare-contrast essay. This is all taken from the textbook in general. So what we focused in until now is specifically the lie and barn burning, but if you're being asked at any other point to do a compare and contrast, these are the tools, and it's very, very hard in writing to break everything down into a how-to. I know a lot of people always say writing is just so challenging. Either a person can write or they can't write, but that it's something which is intuitive. And the truth is, there is an element of intuition and talent that comes into being a writer. It's kind of like music or art, or and that side of your brain, the right side of your brain. But there is an intellectual side to it that says, well, if I follow a template and I follow the rules and I break it down, do I have the ability to write a paper? And this is what, by answering these questions and by following what these rules, kind of like rules of the road, you will be able to navigate your way through on a basic level and write a paper. Don't bypass this step without reading it. And many of you will and say, okay, well, I know how to. At least look it over. Take the time to be more aware of what you're doing when you're writing. There is something to be said for brainstorming, and I know that people say, well, okay, well, am I going to, does brainstorming really work? Well, it really does. I have to tell you. Let's look at this one. After reading both stories, there are two basic patterns, right, for comparison. The book method, point by point. The block method. No one's asking you to follow the technicalities that are listed here. You saw in the sample essays, it's not that complicated. There's a point in all of this where you say, yes, I'm trying to keep it simple, stupid. That's an expression that people use. Comparing and contrasting. Comparisons look at the similarities among concepts. This is something that you already know. What I like to do is use the T method, where I put on one side, I would put on Sardi, on the other side I would put Eli, and then this is my recommendation to you. Just list all the information that you know about these boys that you think would be related to their initiation into adulthood. The hardest part and the most challenging part of writing any essay is staying focused onto your thesis statement. Don't forget, the thesis statement and your job in this assignment is to simply write about these boys' initiation into adulthood. How do they go from being that abused child into being an adult? So you're going to be dealing with if you go back over the story and just list who they are and what happens to them, which leads them to the point at the end of the day of being an adult, and then you can just look at the differences between them and the comparisons between them, the contrasts between them, and the comparisons between them. It will make your job and will make your paper flow so much easier. And then what I would do is look for examples within the story. There's places in the lie, for example, where the father, Eli, is slouched down in the car, and his father yells at him to sit up. Instead of asking him, Eli, is there something wrong? Because clearly there's something wrong. Where his father's tone is always perform, 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 be at your best, be at your best. And the pressure on this child was too much for him to bear. But by mentioning that, you're using the sources, you're using the story itself to reference the point that you're making about how he was abused by his father. And in Barn Burning, when his father goes up within the story and he slaps him across the face and says, I thought you were going to go and tell the truth about me burning down the barn to the council, and the guy, that was the physical abuse that was presented to this boy. So that would be an example as well. So I'm giving you all these PowerPoint slides for you to look over. And basically I'm going to let you do the rest on yourself, because I've given you enough background information on the story. You have also in your, we're going to be adding into it the information on barn burning, that you have from Short Stories for Students. You have the information we're going to be giving you from our references, from the resources for the lie. It's now up to you, given the tools and given the rules of writing, for you to simply sit down and write the paper. You have the examples, and I wish you good luck, and I think that you'll be fine. Good luck, and I'll see you on assignment 2. You can do this. Take care. This is Dr. Sari Rosenberg. I'll see you the next time.